My name is Ethan, and I'm the executive chef at one of Boston's most prestigious restaurants, the Golden Swan. 5 years ago, I thought I had found the love of my life when I married Melissa, a brilliant French literature professor at Boston College. Our love story began at a culinary workshop I was conducting for her students. She was translating my cooking instructions into French, and something magical happened between us that day. The first 3 years of our marriage were everything I had dreamed of. Melissa supported my ambitious career goals, helped me navigate the complex world of high-end dining, and we built what I thought was an unshakable foundation together. Our colonial-style home in Newton became our sanctuary, filled with laughter, intimate dinner parties, and dreams of the family we would one day start. Everything changed last autumn. It started subtly. Melissa began staying later at the college, citing additional tutoring sessions and faculty meetings. She became more distant, less interested in hearing about my day or sharing hers. At first, I attributed it to the stress of her upcoming tenure review. But then came the night that shattered everything. I had returned home early from the restaurant due to a kitchen fire that forced us to close for the evening. The house was supposed to be empty. Melissa had told me she was attending a colleague's retirement dinner. But as I walked up the stairs to our bedroom, I heard voices. Melissa's voice, and a man's voice I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as I approached our bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I saw my wife in the arms of a stranger, a tall, distinguished man with graying temples and an expensive suit. They were kissing passionately, and it was clear this wasn't their first encounter. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. The man was whispering something in her ear, making her laugh in a way I hadn't heard in months. When they finally separated, I heard him say, "I have to go. My flight to Chicago leaves in 2 hours, but I couldn't leave without seeing you one more time." "I wish you didn't have to go, Oliver," Melissa replied, her voice filled with longing. "These conferences are torture when you're away." Oliver. I had heard that name before. Dr. Oliver Whitman, the renowned English literature professor who had been guest lecturing at various universities. He was married, I remembered Melissa mentioning, with children. I retreated downstairs, my mind reeling. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I sat in my study, staring at the wall, trying to understand how my perfect marriage had become this nightmare. When Melissa came downstairs an hour later, she found me sitting in the dark. "Ethan, what are you doing home so early?" she asked, and I could hear the nervousness in her voice. "Kitchen fire," I said quietly. "Restaurants closed for the night." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, as if she had made a decision, she sat down across from me. "You know, don't you?" she whispered. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. "How long?" 3 months, she admitted, tears starting to flow. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Oliver and we connected intellectually first. He understands my work, my passion for literature in a way that I don't," I finished for her. She nodded miserably. "But it doesn't mean I don't love you. This thing with Oliver, it's just physical attraction and intellectual stimulation. You're my husband, my life partner." The next few hours were a blur of tears, accusations, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. Melissa swore that the affair was over, that Oliver was returning to his university in Chicago and would be out of her life forever. She begged me not to throw away 5 years of marriage over what she called a temporary lapse in judgment. Against every instinct I had, against the advice of my best friend Marcus, who told me to run, I decided to give our marriage another chance. Melissa seemed genuinely remorseful. She quit the college's visiting professor program, gave me access to all her email accounts, and even suggested we start couples therapy. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. Some days, I felt like we were healing, rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. Melissa was more attentive than she had been in years, more interested in my work, more affectionate. Other days, I would catch myself studying her face, wondering if she was thinking about him, missing him. But gradually, things seemed to improve. We went on a second honeymoon to Tuscany, renewed our vows in a small ceremony with just our families present, and even started talking about having children again. I began to believe that we had overcome this obstacle and emerged stronger. Our 4th wedding anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to do something special to celebrate our renewed commitment to each other. I decided to throw a surprise dinner party at our home, inviting our closest friends and some of her new colleagues from the community college where she had started teaching. I spent days planning the perfect menu, selecting wines, and arranging flowers. The guest list included 12 people, old friends from culinary school, some of my sous chefs, Melissa's sister Rachel, and several professors from her new job. I even hired a string quartet to play during dinner. The evening started perfectly. Our guests arrived at 7, and everyone was in high spirits. Melissa looked absolutely stunning in a midnight blue dress I had never seen before. She moved through the party with grace and charm, making sure everyone felt welcome, laughing at jokes, and seeming genuinely happy. I was in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on the main course, duck confit with cherry gastrique, one of Melissa's favorites, when I heard the doorbell ring. Strange, I thought, since all our guests had already arrived. Through the kitchen window, I saw Melissa walking toward the front door. A few minutes later, she returned to the kitchen with a troubled expression. "Who was at the door?" I asked. "Oh, just a delivery driver with the wrong address," she said quickly, but something in her voice didn't sound right. The dinner proceeded beautifully. The duck was perfectly cooked, the wine selections were praised by everyone, and the conversation flowed freely. But I noticed that Melissa seemed distracted, checking her phone more frequently than usual, and occasionally glancing toward the windows. Around 9:30, as I was preparing to serve dessert, Melissa announced that she was going to step outside for some fresh air. "Too much wine," she said with a laugh, but I noticed she hadn't actually drunk very much at all. I continued preparing the tiramisu in the kitchen, but something nagged at me. Call it chef's intuition, or perhaps the residual paranoia from her affair, but I decided to check on her. I walked out through the French doors onto our back patio. The patio was empty, but I could see a light on in our garden shed, a small building at the back of our property where we stored gardening tools and where Melissa sometimes retreated to read during summer evenings. I had never seen a light on in there during a dinner party. As I approached the shed, my blood ran cold. Through the small window, I could see two figures embracing passionately. Even in the dim light, I recognized Melissa's midnight blue dress and the tall silhouette of a man I had hoped never to see again. Oliver Whitman was back. I crept closer, my heart hammering in my chest. Their voices carried through the thin walls of the shed. "I can't believe you're here," Melissa was saying. "I thought you were in Chicago for good." "I got a position at Harvard," Oliver replied. "I start in the fall. I've been in Boston for 3 days, but I didn't want to complicate things by contacting you. Then tonight, I drove past your house and saw the party. I couldn't resist." "This is crazy," Melissa whispered, but she made no move to pull away from him. "Ethan is right inside. Our friends are here." "I know," Oliver said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "That's what makes it exciting, isn't it?" What I heard next made my blood freeze. Melissa laughed, a sound I knew intimately, the laugh she used to reserve for me. "You're terrible. But I've missed this." "I've missed you." "Have you really?" Oliver asked. "Because your emails suggested you were working things out with your husband." "I am," Melissa said. "Or rather, I'm making him think I am. Ethan is so trusting, so eager to believe that people can change. He's been like a puppy dog these past few months, so grateful that I chose to stay with him." They both laughed, and the sound cut through me like a knife. "So what's the plan?" Oliver asked. "Give me another few months," Melissa replied. "Let him think everything is perfect, maybe even get pregnant. That would secure my financial future. Then I'll tell him I need space to find myself, or some such nonsense. By then, you'll be established at Harvard, and we can be together openly. And the money? The restaurant is doing incredibly well. He's been talking about opening a second location. If I time it right, I'll be entitled to half of everything in the divorce settlement." I felt like I was going to be sick. Not only had she never ended the affair, but she had been planning our divorce from the moment she asked for forgiveness. Every tender moment we had shared over the past months had been a calculated performance. I stumbled backward, trying to process what I had just heard. But as I retreated, my foot caught on a garden hose, sending me tumbling into a metal watering can. The crash was loud enough to wake the neighbors. The voices in the shed immediately stopped. I scrambled to my feet and hurried back toward the house, but not before I heard the shed door open behind me. "What was that?" Oliver's voice carried across the garden. "Probably just a raccoon," Melissa replied, but I could hear the nervousness in her voice. "You should go. I need to get back to the party before someone notices I'm gone." I made it back to the kitchen just as the back door opened and Melissa slipped inside. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a faint smudge of lipstick on her neck. "Feel better?" I asked, amazed at how normal my voice sounded. "Much," she said with a bright smile. Ready for dessert? The rest of the evening passed in a surreal haze. I served the tiramisu, accepted compliments on the meal, and played the role of the gracious host while my world crumbled around me. Melissa was the perfect hostess, charming and attentive, giving no sign that she had just been planning my financial ruin in our garden shed. Our guests left around midnight, full of praise for the wonderful evening. As the door closed behind the last guest, Melissa turned to me with a satisfied smile. "That was absolutely perfect, darling," she said, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Best anniversary celebration ever. I love you so much." Looking into her eyes, I saw nothing but practiced deception. This woman, whom I had loved and trusted, whom I had forgiven and fought to rebuild my life with, was not just unfaithful. She was a calculating predator who had been planning to destroy me from the moment I gave her a second chance. "I'm exhausted," I said, gently disentangling myself from her embrace. "I'm going to clean up in the morning." "Good idea," she agreed. "I'm tired too. It's been such an emotional day." Emotional. The word would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. That night, I lay in bed next to my wife, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me. Every breath she took felt like a betrayal. Every movement in her sleep made me wonder if she was dreaming of him. By morning, I had made my decision. I waited until Melissa left for work, then called my attorney, Richard Sterling, one of the best divorce lawyers in Boston and a regular customer at my restaurant. I had never thought I would need his services personally. "Ethan," Richard said when I explained the situation, "I'm sorry to hear this, but you need to be very careful how you proceed. Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, but given what you've told me about her financial planning, we need to protect your assets immediately." Over the next week, while maintaining the facade of a happy marriage, I quietly began documenting our finances and consulting with Richard about my options. The restaurant, thankfully, was in my name alone, as were most of our investments. The house had been mine before the marriage, and we had a prenuptial agreement that Melissa had signed without much thought 5 years earlier. But I wanted more than just to protect my assets. I wanted justice. Richard introduced me to a private investigator named Catherine Brooks, who specialized in matrimonial cases. Within days, she had confirmed that Oliver was indeed living in a corporate apartment in Cambridge while he looked for permanent housing near Harvard. She also discovered that Melissa had been meeting him regularly at his apartment, often during her supposed office hours at the community college. But Catherine uncovered something else that shocked even me. Oliver Whitman wasn't just having an affair with my wife. He was having affairs with at least 3 other faculty wives at different universities. It was his pattern: target married women, seduce them with intellectual conversation and romantic gestures, then move on to the next university and the next victim. He's done this at Northwestern, University of Michigan, and now here, Catherine explained as she showed me photographs and documentation. He specifically targets women in unhappy marriages, promising them intellectual fulfillment and emotional connection. Then he uses them for information about their husband's finances. I stared at the evidence spread across my kitchen table. "You're saying this is some kind of scam?" "More like a lifestyle," Catherine replied. "He makes good money as a professor, but he supplements it by targeting wealthy men's wives. Sometimes it's just about the affair, but often there's financial benefit. Expensive gifts from guilty wives, information about business deals, occasionally even blackmail." My hands were shaking as I processed this information. Melissa wasn't just having an affair. She had been targeted by a professional predator who made a hobby of destroying marriages. "What do we do with this?" I asked. Catherine smiled grimly. "We use it." The plan we developed was more elaborate than I had ever imagined. Instead of simply filing for divorce, we decided to gather enough evidence to not only protect me financially, but to expose Oliver's pattern of behavior to his new employer and his previous victims. But first, I needed to catch them in the act one more time, this time with proper documentation. Catherine set up surveillance equipment in strategic locations around our property and Oliver's apartment. We also arranged for a process server to be ready with divorce papers at a moment's notice. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 2 weeks later, Melissa announced that she had a late faculty meeting and wouldn't be home until after 9. Catherine's surveillance team followed her directly to Oliver's apartment building. This time, instead of confronting them immediately, I waited. Catherine's cameras captured them entering the building together, recorded their intimate dinner on his balcony, documented their entire evening together. But the real revelation came the next morning. I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when Melissa's phone, which she had left charging on the counter, began buzzing with notifications. Normally, I would never look at her messages, but given everything I had learned, I felt justified in checking. The messages were from Oliver, but they weren't the romantic words I expected. Instead, they were businesslike, almost clinical. Confirmed, E's restaurant grossed $2.8 million last year. New location projected to bring in $4 million annually. Suggest you accelerate timeline. Spoke with contact at First National. He has been pre-approved for $800,000 business loan. This needs to happen before he signs anything. Found out about prenup. More complicated than expected, but divorce attorney says emotional distress angle could work if we document his controlling behavior. I took screenshots of everything before Melissa came downstairs. When she appeared in the kitchen, looking refreshed and happy, I felt a cold rage unlike anything I had ever experienced. Good meeting last night? I asked casually. Oh yes, she said brightly. We're planning a new curriculum for the fall semester. Very exciting. The lies came so easily to her now. I wondered if she had always been this way, or if Oliver had taught her to be so calculating. That afternoon, I met with Richard and Catherine to review our evidence. We now had documented proof of the affair, recordings of their conversations about financial planning, and evidence of Oliver's previous patterns of behavior. This is more than enough, Richard assured me. But are you sure you want to go this route? Once we file these papers and present this evidence, there's no going back. I thought about the woman I had married 5 years ago, the woman I had believed I was rebuilding my marriage with over the past months. Then I thought about the cold, calculating person who had been planning my financial ruin while sleeping in my bed every night. I'm sure, I said. We decided to wait for one more meeting between Melissa and Oliver, this time to serve them both simultaneously. Catherine's surveillance indicated they met every Tuesday and Friday at his apartment. The next Tuesday would be perfect. But Melissa surprised us all. That Monday evening, she came home with an announcement that changed everything. Ethan, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. I have wonderful news. I'm pregnant. The world seemed to stop spinning. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. Pregnant? I managed to whisper. Yes, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. I know we hadn't been actively trying, but I'm 8 weeks along. I just got confirmation from the doctor today. 8 weeks. I quickly calculated. That would put conception right around the time she had reconciled with me, but also right around the time she had resumed her affair with Oliver. The baby might not even be mine. That night, as Melissa slept beside me, her hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, I stared at the ceiling and realized that everything had just become infinitely more complicated. I called Richard first thing the next morning. We need a paternity test, I said without preamble. Ethan, that's going to be tricky. She has to consent to testing during pregnancy, and it carries some risk. Then we wait until after the birth. That could be months of delay, and in the meantime, she could establish stronger financial claims if you're living as a married couple expecting a child. I felt trapped. If the baby was mine, I didn't want to destroy my child's family before he or she was even born. If the baby wasn't mine, I was being manipulated into staying in a marriage with a woman who had been planning to destroy me. That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Melissa, I said as we sat down to dinner, I know about Oliver. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. For a moment, I saw pure panic flash across her face, but then her expression smoothed into one of confusion. What do you mean? I know he's back in Boston. I know you've been seeing him. I know about your plans to divorce me after securing your financial future. The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours. Then, slowly, Melissa set down her fork and looked directly at me. How long have you known? She asked, her voice completely calm. Since our anniversary party. I saw you in the garden shed. She nodded slowly, as if processing information. And you've just been watching me? Pretending everything was normal? Just like you've been pretending for the past 6 months. Another long pause. Then, to my absolute shock, Melissa began to laugh. Not the nervous laughter of someone caught in a lie, but genuine, almost relieved laughter. Oh, Ethan, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. You have no idea how exhausting it's been, pretending to be the grateful, repentant wife. Do you know how many times I've had to fake enthusiasm for your cooking shows and restaurant talk? I stared at her, speechless. The mask had completely fallen away, revealing a stranger. So what now? She asked, leaning back in her chair. Are you going to throw me out? Demand a divorce? Because I have to tell you, it's not going to be as simple as you think. Because of the baby? Her smile was cold and calculating. Among other things, Massachusetts law is very protective of pregnant wives, and juries tend to be sympathetic to expectant mothers whose husbands abandon them. I'm not abandoning anyone. You're the one who's been having an affair and planning to leave. Prove it, she said simply. It's my word against yours. And I'm the pregnant wife of a successful businessman who spends most of his time at work, leaving his lonely wife to seek comfort elsewhere. I realized then that she had thought this through much more carefully than I had given her credit for. But what she didn't know was that I had evidence, hours of recorded conversations, photographs, financial documents. Actually, I said quietly, I can prove it. For the first time that evening, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Over the next hour, I laid out everything I had discovered. The surveillance footage, the recorded conversations, the evidence of Oliver's pattern of targeting married women, the text messages about my finances. With each revelation, I watched the color drain from her face. When I finished, she sat in stunned silence for several minutes. You've been spying on me, she said finally. You've been planning to destroy me, I replied. I'd say we're even. What do you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to leave. Tonight. I want an uncontested divorce with no financial settlement beyond what's outlined in our prenuptial agreement. And I want a paternity test as soon as it's safe to do so. And if I refuse? I pulled out a manila envelope and set it on the table between us. Then I release all of this evidence to your employer, to Harvard's administration, to Oliver's wife in Chicago. Oh yes, we found out he's still married, and to the local media. I'm sure the story of a university professor and his accomplice targeting wealthy husbands would be of great interest to the press. Melissa stared at the envelope as if it were a snake that might strike at any moment. You bastard, she whispered. No, I said calmly. I'm just someone who finally learned not to be a victim. She left that night, taking only her personal belongings. The next morning, I found divorce papers slipped under my door, signed and notarized. She had agreed to all my terms. But the story wasn't over yet. 3 days later, Catherine called me with news that I should have expected but somehow hadn't. Oliver Whitman has disappeared, she said. Cleared out his apartment, resigned from Harvard via email, and vanished. Apparently, Melissa called him the night you confronted her. So he ran? Like a rabbit. Left Melissa high and dry. But here's the interesting part. We tracked his credit cards. He flew to Seattle, where he's apparently starting the same pattern with faculty at University of Washington. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and pity. Melissa had been as much a victim of Oliver's manipulation as I had been, but she had chosen to become his accomplice rather than his target. The paternity test, conducted after the baby was born 4 months later, confirmed what I had suspected. The child, a beautiful baby girl Melissa named Sophie, was Oliver's daughter, not mine. Melissa tried to contact me several times after Sophie's birth, claiming she wanted to work things out and asking for financial support. Each time, I referred her to my attorney. The last I heard, she was working as a substitute teacher and living in a small apartment across town. Oliver never contacted her again after fleeing to Seattle, and she was raising Sophie alone. I felt no satisfaction in her struggles, but I felt no guilt either. She had made her choices, just as I had made mine. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I opened my second restaurant. Ethan's Table became even more successful than the Golden Swan, earning a James Beard nomination within its first year. I've started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but I'm learning to trust my instincts about people in a way I never had to before. The experience with Melissa taught me that love without respect is just manipulation, and that forgiveness without accountability is just enabling. Sometimes, late at night in my quiet house, I think about the man I was 5 years ago, trusting, perhaps naively optimistic, believing that love could conquer any obstacle. I don't mourn the loss of that innocence, though. The man I am now is stronger, wiser, and infinitely more careful about where I place my trust. My story isn't one of revenge or triumph. It's simply the story of a man who learned that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be a victim. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. And sometimes that's exactly as it should be. I never gave Melissa a third chance, and I never regretted that decision. Some mistakes deserve forgiveness. Others deserve consequences. Learning the difference between the two was the most valuable lesson I ever learned. Thank you for watching the video to the end. maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel. So subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video, there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.